Hello, this is What It Takes to Lead, a podcast about Mike Sterlacey's faith, family, friendships, and business lessons learned over 40 plus years of selling insurance and building a rapid growth insurance agency in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. I'm one of your hosts today, Garrett Cooper, and today I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Leif Hurst, special guest, Executive Vice President and former President John Sutter, and Chief Revenue Officer Andy Bracken, and, of course, CoVerica founder and chairman Mike Sterlacey. Gentlemen, how's everyone doing on this fine afternoon?
Absolutely great. Thank you.
Flew in last night to be at our all-hands meeting, and I've had Zoom after Zoom, and so I'm just peachy.
There you go.
I must say that I've been getting ready to go out of the country. I'm going on a mission trip next week. And so
Where to?
To Guatemala.
Oh, very nice.
So getting ready physically here at work to be away for a week because I won't be in touch with technology very much. Where we're going is always a fun thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I saw you in the gym. I don't know if you're getting ready to do some hiking or what, but you look like you were getting prepared for something. So yeah, my household, we are all well and better. So last podcast, I don't know if anybody picked up on or not, but it was basically a game of will Leif cough or not? And thanks to John and his drawer full of cough drops, I made it through with minimal coughing. But what was so funny, as soon as we hit stop record, it was just like, it's like, it just like all of a sudden it was like, okay, now. And so yeah, that was fun.
And Leif, I think everybody's now clear, right, to re-engage with society in the Hurst household. Is that right?
Yeah, so we are good to come outside. London is clear of her pneumonia, and that poor girl, she got flu B or flu A, turned into pneumonia, and then double ear infection with double eardrums burst. And it was just like, this poor child, she just cannot get through it. And so, but she's a trooper. I mean, there's a reason why women are allowed to are the ones to give birth, because through all of it, I was just like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing? She's like, I'm a 3. She's like, I'm good. My son would have been in a fetal position on the floor. So
A true guy.
Yep.
Well, today we've got a couple special guests, as I mentioned, John and Andy, and we're going to talk a lot about mergers and acquisitions today, and specifically CoVerica's approach to it. And so, John, I feel you're a terrific person to just kind of delve into this topic through your story, because in many ways it represents a familiar scenario in the industry. So, can you tell our audience, how did you arrive at CoVerica? And eventually become one of the company's leaders?
Okay, so I'm not sure Andy wants to follow this pathway for his mergers and acquisitions, but the first time that I met Mike was at the attorney's table sitting across from him because I had sued him.
This is one of my favorite stories ever, by the way.
Hey, man, little background. So I was the president and partner in an agency called Unimark, and we specialized in large accounts. Maybe $2 million in revenue was our total book. And in the space of about a year, we lost 3 of our national accounts, about half of our volume. And so we were really getting desperate situations. And one of our longtime agents, a man by the name of John Crooks, kind of saw the writing on the wall before any of us and decided that he would seek employment elsewhere, and ended up at what was CoVerica, but Sovereign at that time. And then John, in violation, in my humble opinion, of his non-compete, started to take his accounts away. And so I sued John, I sued Sovereign, and I sued Mike. And so we ended up across the table from each other. And this is where you can see how unique Mike is, because first time I've ever met him, and he goes, well, John, this is like a divorce. John Crooks, he's been with you for 20 years, but he doesn't love you anymore. And he wants to come over to CoVerica. And so, there's going to be a divorce. John's going to leave, and we've got to protect the children, meaning the accounts, because if it's a nasty, bitter divorce, all sides will lose. So he says, we're going to work it out for John and his departure, and we'll take care of the sale. He says, but what I really want to do is I want Unimark. I want you to come. I want you to come over to us because we've heard good things about the agency and about you. And that's what I'm really after, is I want you to come to our agency. And I go, Mike, it sounds great, but I can't do it because the reason I'm here, and Charlie is my partner is in the other room, is because he would not enter a room with everybody else here. And so no way we're going to sell right now. But we stayed in touch over the course of about a year, met a couple times for coffee, and Mike kept up the little gentle pushing of coming over. And after about a year, I went to my partner and I said, Charlie, we really need to look at maybe selling to CoVerica. And he says, no way, no how. I'm not going to do anything with those guys. And I reminded him that in another year, the non-compete that we negotiated with the sale of John Crook's book was going to run out, and the entire strength of CoVerica was going to come back after Unimark's business. And Charlie goes, why don't you see what we can work out? So I happily got back in touch with Mike. Took a little bit of, not very long actually, but a little bit of time. Worked out a deal. Charlie was able to retire. I came over to CoVerica, and the rest, as they say, is history. But having been in that situation of an agency, the CoVerica was the white knight at just the right time. Because losing half of our volume, we were, as I tell everybody, we were circling the toilet bowl. Carriers were coming to us saying that if we didn't get our production back, they were going to, cancel our contract. Some of them did. So we went from replacing business directly with brokers, which means your commission went down by a third. So it was really a bad situation. And then coming over to CoVerica, I walked through the door and knew this was different than any place I'd ever been. The culture, the people that were here, you could just tell right away it was different. And as I tell everybody that I tell that story to, I wish I'd have sued Mike 10 years earlier because my life would have been a whole lot easier.
And not only did you come into the office, you eventually end up leading the office.
Oh, yes.
That is true. After I'd been here a little bit, Mike asked me to be on the leadership team with Andy and Rhonda and him as a sales representative because I still had an active book, was still working that. And then after a period of time as the leadership team as a whole, he did ask me to become president, which I needed a day to think about, but came back and told him I'm happy to do it, give him a 10-year commitment. And then 2 years ago, Rhonda took over as Mike and I and Andy were stepping back from our roles to make way for the next generation coming in. I became Senior Vice President of Risk Management.
Perfect. What a story. Mike, in all these conversations, we always make sure that we cover the why. It just in anything that we're going to talk about on the podcast, but it seems like it's a common thread with everything that you do. And why is CoVerica's approach so unique when it comes to M&A? And on the flip side, why are acquisitions so important for CoVerica to perpetuate into the future?
I was interested to hear what John had to say about the history of how we got together. And a couple things that I want to put into it is that, once again, a plug for the second precept, which is everybody's best sustainable interest. John Crooks, I had met John, and he really was scared to death with the loss of markets. And the reputation of Unimark was stellar. And I entered into it realizing that it would be in the best interest of all of us for Unimark to become part of CoVerica. And John is correct. Charlie, was really fighting that. And that's something that I've been committed to not do as the patriarch of the company, which is to put my interests above that of everyone else. So the M&A is very important. Why? Because when you take over, whether it's a book or an agency or a platform agency, which is we could talk about if anybody has any questions on that. But you're getting revenue immediately, and if you have the ability to maintain it and the staff to service it, you not only are increasing your top line, but you're making certain that your current staff is fully employed. And which gets back to the second precept, we want to make certain that we can keep our employees gainfully employed. And so there is a constant need to continue to grow. So organic growth is very expensive, and it takes a long time. Personal lines is more transactional. It's easier. It's quicker. Commercial lines can be typically a year, and a producer that comes in on commercial lines, it's usually about 3 years before they're really making money for the agency. So whenever you can find a book or an agency to acquire, it's a good thing. Now, to take it deeper with the 4 precepts that we use, there are a lot of good people that help agencies run. And in the case of where we're talking about John Crooks, he was in fear of losing his livelihood. There's a lot of agencies out there that if they're running for just to make as much money as they can, as quick as they can, EBITDA, it'll be very, it can become a backstabbing, very difficult place to work. Whereas if you're looking at from the long-term benefit of everybody and staff stratification to where you're getting work for other people, you will grow organically as well as M&A. And there are people in those agencies that might be better suited to a different seat on the bus. And so there's a lot to that. And with John, at the time, he was exactly what we needed to be in the president position of the agency. At first, I wanted him because of his risk management skill set to work with the younger producers. But then his prowess and ability to manage the company became perfect for the model of Traction, which is visionary and an integrator. But what I've made very clear, and this is kind of a side note with both Andy and John, Rhonda tangentially, is that the different ideas and the different business models that we'll be getting into in the future, I needed their skill set separate and apart from CoVerica, because CoVerica is what's going to perpetuate without us. So we are now the patriarchs of the company, but we'll be working on other things because I don't know anybody that really has a lot on the ball that wants to retire. They want to use their skill set in different ways. So the plans we have for the future with John and Andy and me would be different, but still augmenting CoVerica, just like the other business models that we have. Ansel's one, the Alliance, Lotus, our insurance company. So there are other things that their unique skill sets are very important. But back to just CoVerica and most of the people that are going to be listening to this audio or this podcast, is that we want very much to see the company's ethos continue into the future and prepare for our exodus, but still be in a position to work in the company and on the company.
So it's not just about books of business to get revenue in the door and hit some just number every single year, but you're looking for staff, you're looking for talent, you're looking for, as an example, we may talk about it later, but Agape filled a niche that we didn't have.
Yes.
So it could be a strategic play. That's
right. There are three, like I mentioned it earlier, so I'll give a little bit more color on it. There are books of business, there are agencies, and then there's platforms. When we bought Agape, and I'm proud to say we still have 6 of the original 7 employees there. So we didn't just buy it to get rid of people and have the money. They are in the med-mal area, and we had no real business or knowledge in med-mal, so now we do. But on top of that, you have all the personal lines and all the auxiliary business that's tied to those clients. So there's a way for other people within CoVerica. So in a way, it's kind of like we go out and slay an animal and we bring it in to feed the tribe. So that's when you're buying an agency. When you're buying a book, you're just buying the client relationship, and you don't have a producer, or the producer is going to retire and is phasing out. A platform is really when you buy something that may have the pen to where they write their own policies, or like if we want to get into another state, one thing that we've given Andy to be responsible for is look at geographic advantages to us so that their loss ratio will augment our loss ratio so we can have greater contingencies.
No, that's and so there's a geographical element to it. And that's something that too, whenever you're looking at states, you've got to kind of weigh out. I mean, Arizona is a great state to do business in, not a lot of premium there.
Correct.
So there's this constant kind of way out of, do they face the same kind of perils that we do as a state, or is there enough premium there to justify it?
And to the point of the Agape acquisition, in Texas, we have tort reform. Mm-hmm. And so the premiums are actually lower here than up in the New England area where there isn't. And so the amount of work necessary to do that same policy is going to be 3 and 4 times the commission.
Right.
So it gives us an opportunity geographically to move into different areas of the country to where we may be limited here versus other areas as well.
Perfect.
So Andy, we're talking about M&A, and I consider you our maestro right, when it comes to that process, right? So there's the obviously the initial touch point, the in-person meetings, the nurturing of it. I mean, because oftentimes, this might be part of that principal's succession plan, which they may not initially be, jumping at the bit to wrap up. Then there's the actual closing of it and the integration of the systems and the book and communicating to these policyholders. Can you, as CoVerica's CRO, who's responsible for deal making, can you walk our audience through a typical process? How someone, if they're thinking right now that this is something that they may want to do in the near future, how they might engage you, what you look for in a potential acquisition, and maybe even talk through some recent deals, that you've completed over the last couple of years.
Well, probably the most immediate way and most recently recurring way to reach us is through our website. We do have a link on the website directly through the CoVerica website in the About Us section where you can do the drop down, and there is a mergers and acquisition link there that you can go to and fill out just a simple form. Give us a little bit of information about who you are, maybe some potential revenue estimates on your agency, and then why are you doing this? And that's really where it gets into the meat and potatoes of what it is that you really want. And what's great about what we can do here is we can fit just about any scenario. Not every scenario is good for us. And we've learned that there are some situations to where it may not be a good deal for us. But we can circle back to the Agape deal. I mean, we got that particular referral through one of our carrier partners. And one of the principals from Agape came to us. I sat down across the table with him, and he said, my partner in the deal, who lived in California, was interested in selling. And so before we even started talking about, the terms of the deal, he wanted to get comfortable with the transaction and the culture itself. Who's CoVerica? Does it make sense? Because he had a dear place in his heart for his staff, and to make sure that the deal was good for his staff, which it's been one of the biggest bonuses for us was getting the staff over, just because right now it's so difficult to find good quality staff. Secondarily, the niche, as Michael explained earlier, was just a bonus to diversify CoVerica's overall book and risk structure. And so we're going to have a conversation first about culture, what it is that you, the individual, wants, where you are within your life cycle, your agency cycle, if you're looking to shed some of the boring details in the back office stuff that you don't like. And so where you can sell. Many of these, agency principals have started with one-man shops or one-woman shops, and they've gone beyond their kind of capacity to where they staled out. And then you've got the situations with John to where, although he says it's not the best way to do it, you can certainly engage with those types of agencies that are in a position to where they need something more. I think these guys have been in the industry a lot longer than I have. And it's in the 15 years that I've been part of, as an insider in the insurance agency business, things are really different now than they ever have been. Technology, the carriers are acting differently. And so a lot of agency principals out there are feeling the squeeze, especially in personal lines locally. And then you'll have a third category. I just had lunch with a guy yesterday that we actually have a long-standing relationship through our agency alliance, who's been in the industry for 50 years. And he's looking to kind of see where the end of his professional career and kind of what that might look like. And so we can partner with him throughout that. But the first question that I asked him, quite frankly, I said, Scott, why are you doing this? What is it that you want out of this? How long do you want to work? Because many of these folks don't want to not work. They still want to continue to work. And so we'll go through a long conversation just to make sure it's the right fit before we even engage into some of the gory details and, book statistics and, all the stuff that makes a deal, valuation and analysis necessary for us to be able to make sure that it fits into the CoVerica structure as well.
Whenever you're looking at a book of business, just to follow up on that question, are you looking for specifics of partner mix, how much of it's standard, non-standard business, E&S, things like that?
We actually are. And in fact, our strategy's probably changed, at least from the short term, because at least in Texas, personal lines carriers are shutting down. We recently did one personal lines deal to where the carriers would not give us one of the appointments that we didn't have. And so some of the strategies that we have to employ oftentimes mean that we have to put on the side burner for a temporary time a particular class of business. And so right now, commercial lines business, if we're targeting something specific, is what we're trying to find to see if there are agencies that deal exclusively or more predominantly with that particular line of business. We do like standard carriers. It's easier to get that business onboarded into ours. Obviously, the commission structure with standard carriers as well is better as well.
Gotcha. And John, just kind of switching gears and looking at it from your perspective, what's something that you can share with our listeners that might be contemplating selling their agency? What are some questions that you would encourage them to consider if they're talking to a potential suitor or an agency, and whether it's a larger agency like us at CoVerica or maybe if it's even like a private equity firm?
I think that Andy touched on it because it's the answer to the question that he posed. What do you want out of this? That's something that we ask that virtually no one else does. And we ask it of everyone. We ask it of our partner carriers. We ask it of our team members. We ask it, of the potential merger and acquisitions. Where do you want to end up? Because at the end of the day, we want to help them accomplish that they want to achieve. Right? We want to help them hit their end goals because we know if we can do that, they'll be successful, we'll be successful, and the merger and acquisition will be successful. So I think as an agency owner, thinking about what the end game is, where do you want to be? What does it involve? What does it look like? To Andy's question, do you want to sell and remain active? And if you're going to do that for 10 or 15 years, the way he acquires an agency, CoVerica acquires the agency, we put the control in the owner that's selling to us. Mm-hmm. They control it. Okay, if you want to be separate and you want to go ahead and run a profit center for us and be part of the team, you can do that as long as you want. Then you tell us when you're ready to sell the rest of your equity out. Put the control back in them. The way that Mike has it set up that he's bought agencies in the past, that Andy's done in the past, that we're doing now, is different than anybody else out there. Okay, and I think that's the main thing, is they need to be aware of that. They need to think about that. I think it's a good question like Agape did ask about the culture. Culture here is different than anywhere else. Okay, you're given the opportunity to succeed as far as your talents and your will take you. And you can stay involved. Most of the time, if there's a sale, it's thank you very much. You may have a 3-year earnout, then you're gone. The employees that are involved in it all learn that, with every sale, there's a change. I think this is the best place to sell your agency to achieve your long-term goals and to find that culture that will be the fit for you.
Gotcha. And to dovetail that, Mike, I'm going to ask you a bonus question that we didn't really plan for. If you're ever part of an agency and they sell to a firm and they say the words, "Nothing's going to change," you got a story on that? You got a story on that?
We are all laughing at that.
It's a lie. Years ago, I was looking at agents that sold to other agencies. And I said, you do realize that you're paying to buy yourself. Mm-hmm. What do you mean? Well, when you sell your agency with an earnout, now, of course, the earnouts have changed drastically since the private equity people got into it. But it used to be you would sell your agency and they would pay you so much up front and then pay over time. So you're working in the agency and you've sold your equity. So you end up, it's a zero-sum game. But everything has to change. And we're no different. Things will change. Well, what will change here as opposed to other places? Other places will cherry pick. They'll figure out what is the most profitable business and get rid of the business that they don't think is profitable. Or same thing with employees. If they have somebody in a position already in that agency and you're hiring one of your employees of your agency and that person is not fully employed yet, then they're going to be let go. Or they have to right size or reapply for their job. So there's going to be a lot of changes. And plus there is the people that are working at the existing agency may not be very kind to the new people that come on board. And there's all kinds of issues that deal with it. But absolutely things have to change. If for no other reason, you have to pay for the debt to buy that agency. Mm-hmm. So what's the plan? Well, here it is. We're looking at agencies to acquire because we like the talent that's there, or we're looking at it from the longevity of it. If it takes 3 years typically for a commercial producer to be profitable, when you're looking at an acquisition, how long are you looking at before it truly is profitable? So it's just looking at the cultural issue and also the geographic footprint. Is that going to be? So there are other factors that enter into it. We don't just want a bunch of agencies because we're trying to save the world. I mean, that's suicide. But you have to look at it from the perspective of who CoVerica is. If we can take on that revenue base of that agency and roll the business into our existing markets or roll it into our markets, it's feeding the carriers because the carriers have to continue to grow. But they want to grow with agencies that they like, that they trust. And we've spent a lifetime building that relationship with our carriers. So when we take over another agency, even situations where the book of business, they're not really happy with it, but if they know that we're going to take it over, they feel better about it. So to your original question, will things change? Absolutely, they're going to change, but the changes can be for the better or for the worst. And so a lot of people don't really think about that. What they're and if I've said this many times, just like that, everything's going to change. People that offer stupid money for an agency, get ready.
Right.
I remember when I started at Maxim Agency in 92 and finally took over the agency in 95, I looked at the contracts of the acquisitions that they'd made. They'd made 11 acquisitions to build Maxim. And just looking at it, I knew that we were going to run out of business. They were paying way too much and too aggressively. So I just said, we're canceling your contracts. And out of the 11 of them, one says, don't you dare, my son's an attorney and he'll sue you. And so I said, okay, I'll let you go. Then the other ones said the same thing over and over again. I knew it was too good to be true. Well, if you knew it was too good to be true, why did you do it? We can't afford to do this. You know that this won't sustain itself. Now, we're going to pay you what we owe you, but we need more time to pay you off. And so we paid every one of them and they got their money. They just didn't get it as quickly as they wanted to because we just couldn't afford it. And then finally, George Coker was his name. I don't know if George is still alive, but in his age, he looked at me and he says, Mike, I think you're going to do just fine. He says, but I want a secured debt. I said, absolutely. In other words, I couldn't sell the agency until he was paid for because he was concerned that I was going to flip the agency because that's what was happening a lot of. So we're looking for those people that want to do right by their staff and in some cases do the painful things that they didn't want to do. If you have employees that are underemployed or really shouldn't be a part of your organization, we, by following the precepts, can sit down and say, okay, let's look at the facts. Die to self, what's in everybody's best sustainable interest, do the right thing for the right reasons, and have open, honest dialogue where we will talk to somebody and say, you really don't like your job, do you? You really don't want to do this. If there's something we can do so that they do feel good about their work and that they do become a viable part of our organization, that's the first goal. But if they're not wanting to do it and they're only doing it because, I'm only here because my dad owned the agency, which is how I ended up buying Maxim. The two boys of Jack Summerfield were in the business and they didn't want to be here. They were only here because Jack wanted them. Well, there's a lot of agencies out there where they're small, they're family owned, they're hoping that their kids will take it over, and their kids may not be competent or they may not want it. So our approach allows them to merge with the agency, continue to work, continue to be viable as long as they want to. And if they want to sell and go do something else, then we'll help that too.
Yeah, and that's got to be important whenever you're first talking to an agency is like be open and honest with us about the agency. And what I mean by that is there some cultural debt here with the staff, or are there some things that maybe you've been putting off? We know that Stan is not fully employed. Let's know that on the outset. And so that's something that's been real interesting. And just even some of the acquisitions that I've seen, I remember with Pacific, I mean, his thing was just like, look, when it's done, don't call me. Like he's like, I want to sell off in the sunset.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And of course that's where we got Donnell.
And Pam,
Pam
she's
McCord.
now retired,
Yeah.
but she was an employee of the year at one point.
Right.
There is another tremendous asset that we bring that I'm just go ahead and say it, which is we will help the principals in their agencies be able to have the courage to make the important decisions and execute. Whereas, that saying it's lonely at the top, very often these agency principals are just, they're so beat up by trying to hold it together, and they're wanting to sell because they say, this is just ugly. I don't want it. Well, what are you going to do now? Well, I don't know. But we have, and they're still with us, agency principals that they were down to just a couple of markets and they were being squeezed, and they get to where their employees are not happy and their back's up against the wall. Well, we can offer an olive branch and bring them on board so that they can work with us and have the depth, and so then they're liberated to do the parts of the work that they love doing. And so back when I was doing the M&As before Andy, I'd say, what are you passionate about? What do you like doing? What are you good at? What's your God talents? And very often they're not doing what they want to do because somebody was saying it at one of the meetings of, I think it was you talking about running a restaurant that was a chef. They love to cook. And then, all right. So that's what happens to a lot of agency principals. But the problem is they're making good money. They get forced into, well, what do I do now? So, I mean, you said the same thing on our last podcast. It was our last podcast.
Yeah, that was the E-Myth, a chef friend of mine, Cindy.
Yeah.
She opened up a restaurant and found out she did it because she loves to cook. And guess what? She doesn't get to do anymore.
Right.
She doesn't get to cook anymore. So, and John, thank you for your answer on that, by the way. And it made me think of some of those other stories.
So my question is really for the three of you in the room, right, who've been in the sector for a while, deal-making side, obviously parts of deals. Private equity has stepped into the insurance sector, it seems for the better part of the last 10 years, could probably even argue a little longer than that. Can you just talk about how financial buyers have changed the playing field a bit for agencies like CoVerica that, this is obviously what you do. And, the back to Mike's precepts, we're in it here for the second precept, if really all four, but at least the second precept for sure, trying to do right by all parties. Whereas, financial buyers, their interest is purely EBITDA. So can you talk a little bit about how those players have changed the dynamic, the deal-making dynamic in the insurance sector? Yeah,
probably up until maybe early last year. When money was free, then that drove the multiples of what the PE firms were willing to purchase through the roof. And it gave, to the point that Michael was saying earlier about offering way too much, they could offer a lot. And it was really attractive for some of these agency principals to go after the money. Hoping that nothing would change. But at some point, the piper is going to have to be paid. And last year, when the Fed started cranking up interest rates, the deal flow has slowed down. multiples have gone down. I think before we were seeing revenue multiples north of 3.5, even 4 times, which is just ridiculous. When some of the earlier deals that we were doing when I first came on board, we were doing 1.5 times, maybe 2 times top was really unusual unless there was a lot of opportunity aside from
Preferred
just the
carriers.
Yeah. And so now it's actually given us a little more opportunity where before I had to fight against the PE firms. And we had to really focus on the conversation of culture, which is, the Agape deal that we mentioned earlier was right in the middle of that. And so Jerry probably could have gotten more. But he was more interested in the culture. Well, now it's really given us an opportunity with the 38,000, agencies that are around the country, many of whom are agency principals in our sweet spot of, say, $500,000 or so in commission, where they don't have a perpetuation plan. And so multiples are coming down. We can start talking about, as John mentioned, the why and the what that they want to do in this next and potentially final season of their career, of their life that they've spent so many years in building up a great investment.
Yeah, there was something that happened at an alliance meeting. You were there talking about M&A deals, and I was talking to one of the members at the end of the meeting, and he said, "Man, really, all I've ever told my wife is if I wake up dead someday, call these people." And because it's just like, this is who we trust. Like, this is who I trust. And we actually had that happen with one of our ISMs. He came down with a terminal disease, really short notice. And I mean, I remember we were there when we delivered a check to his spouse. And I mean, it was, a phenomenal thing and unfortunate to happen, but his clients were never interrupted. And that was always something that he worried about, is he didn't plan for perpetuation. And, so to kind of have like a built-in agreement or a built-in gentleman's agreement of, in case of fire, break glass kind of contact. So,
well, I think the other thing that an owner should think about, and we've been talking about it, who are you going to be doing business with? Mm-hmm. Okay, because it's going to dictate the terms of everything. And so you really need to seriously think about that. So not to say that there haven't always been cutthroat takeovers. An agency will buy another and they'll deliver to all the producers and say, "Oh, here, we just sold yesterday. Here's your new contract. Sign it. You're leaving," or mm-hmm. those type of arrangements. But I think the fast money venture capitalists took it to a new art form, and it really is, you're going to get your money, and you're going to go through there. And if that's what you're looking for, then maybe it doesn't matter who your partner is going to be. But if you're trying to stay on a little longer past your earnout period, if you care about your agency, if you care about your staff, you better think really hard and heavy about who it is you're going to be doing business with. And that's what I think we have to offer that we've been talking about. We're going to be active in your success.
There is another aspect too that John just kind of reminded me of, and that is the attitude. If you want to make money selling insurance, something that you've got to figure out real quickly is that what distinguishes you from the competition? And do the clients see you as a resource? Do they see you as somebody that's really going to help their business or on their personal lines? In other words, whether it's a personal line account or a commercial line account, I've seen where Eric Hurt is a good example of this, where I listened to him one time talking to a client, and I won't mention the carriers, but they called him and they wanted him to shop the insurance because in personal lines, they've gone up very drastically. And so he explained to them, well, I can move you to this other company and it's less expensive for now and until the next rate increase or the next renewal. And they asked him, well, what would you do? And he says, well, I'd stay where I'm at. And he was explaining to the client that if you stay where you're at, you're building up a kind of a bank account with that carrier. So when you have a claim, they know you're a loyal client. If you change every 6 months or every year to get something cheaper, then they know this. And with the data nowadays, they're going to know more and more about these things. So I think John's bringing up a good point of who you're going to do business with, but what is the attitude of that company with the customers and with the employees? At the end of the day, we're working with each other a lot, and we spend more time with each other probably than we do with our own families at work. So the culture becomes very important. So if you own a business, you got into business because of a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons was because you wanted to do business the way you wanted to do business. You wanted to make as much as your talent, commitment, and integrity could take you. So when you bring in other people because of the safety of a larger size, more markets, more ability to help your client with other options, you need to also make certain that the people share your core values.
Yeah, I just spoke with a guy up in Ohio a couple of weeks ago who coincidentally caught us as a referral from one of our producers who was a client who worked for and was highly successful in running high-end automobile dealerships and was highly successful financially, but he got tired of working that much and not getting anything out of it, working for the other guy. And so he's engaged with me about figuring out a way that we might be able to do something that would help him personally and that he could, also use his relationships that he's gained over the many years in order for him to be able to benefit those people that he knows along with us. So.
Yeah, and Andy, I want to stay with that theme for a second because, earlier in the show, you mentioned about how there tends to be sort of three types of sellers that we've seen quite a bit over the years. And I'll sort of bucket them as the young producer, right, who maybe starts in personal lines, eventually crosses over to commercial lines. So they're juggling both personal lines and commercial lines, and they're growing really fast. And maybe they even find, to a point Leaf made, that they just wanted to be a cook after all, right? They didn't want to actually run the restaurant, so to speak. So, we sort of run into this young producer, maybe wants to kind of focus on a particular type of product or a particular type of client. They're growing really fast. And again, they just need help, right? Sort of chaotic. Then we have a sort of second type of seller, which is more of John's scenario where there's a stabilization thing, right? So the agency, there's a contract that got pulled. Maybe they lost a client. Maybe there was some, event. Thinking recently, of course, with some of the stuff that's happened in Florida, but also not to mention Texas. And then the third type of seller, which is, sort of the one that I think most people think about, in terms of principal selling, which is, the person's looking to retire. Mike's point earlier in the show, maybe they don't have heirs that want to take over the insurance agency. Can you talk a little bit about like these three types of sellers, the young, fast producer, the principal finds himself in a stabilization situation, and then the principal wants to retire. Like, what's unique to some of those situations? Because I know you've done deals across all three. What's unique to them, and then what are sort of the issues that you've seen over time that we solve for them?
I think every scenario as I've done this is different, regardless of whether or not it's which of the three buckets it comes from. And so there is a little bit of let's go in and you're almost starting from scratch with some basic commonalities about the fact that they're needing something. And so that's what's common with all of them is they're needing something, and we can step in and hopefully be a bridge or a partner to that. But the young guys, as you mentioned, the cook example, I think, is a great one. We recently did one deal to where they liked doing personal lines, started out in personal lines, but he wanted to focus in commercial. And so we were able to step in and just acquire and value his personal lines book. The people who are looking for stability, again, an agency of our size, we're now an agency of size. I think we're in the 95th percentile or something like that in the country. And so that provides us options to be able to be both selective and to be able to have an opportunity for somebody to come in and we can settle their road. And then, I think still the sweet spot and the big opportunity in our industry right now are those agency principals that are looking at what are they going to do next at the last season. They've spent so many years building up successful business. And part of it is, in fact, I asked this of the gentleman yesterday that I was meeting with, because most of the time these guys men and women are highly successful and they've got a little bit of an ego. Mm. And so because of that, they're afraid to look at their own mortality, which is really what perpetuation is all about. I mean, Mike mentioned earlier, and it was the first time that he had ever included me in the group of being a patriarch. It's like, whoa, hold on now.
You'll be 60 soon. So
I will.
I'm going to punch that card. But that's the thing is, I remember you talked about the future generation and perpetuation of CoVerica, or back then it was a different name, but in my interview almost 21 years ago in May. And so this whole thing we've been doing, and we talked about in a previous podcast about, the perpetuating the agency through stock it's been in your noodle for a while.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think it's in most agency owners.
It's not,
brain.
And you bring up something that I have to admit now that I didn't for me. I remember even my dad even warned me. He says, Mike, if you think other people think like you do, you're going to go crazy. Well, I thought I didn't understand what he was saying. And when I look back, that's the if you can stay cognizant when you're almost 70, I'll be 70 in a few months, you start to see the patterns in the past. And when I worked at Century, this is going way back. I remember Bob Rico was his name. He was a manager, and he says, Mike, you don't fit here. Well, that upset me. I thought, what do you mean? I want to be here. I like everybody else. Kind of what he was saying is, you don't think like the other people here,
right? So
you need to go do something else, and that's part of our. Let's figure out what your God-given talents are and help you really develop those. But I think that one of my, I'll say it's a gift, is I always start at the end. I am at the end and I can't help myself, and so I think in terms of, okay, why are you doing what you're doing? Because ultimately it's going to take you on a path. Do you want to steer the path? Whereas if you think about, okay, here's where I want to be or where I want to be at this point in my life, then you can work backwards. If you know where you want to be and what you want to do, you want to be married someday, you want to have kids, you want to have a family, you want to live in Dallas, you want to live in New York, whatever it is you want to do, if that's what you really want, now you can change, of course, change your mind. But if that's what you want, every action you take, is it going to get you closer to that goal or not? Mm-hmm. And if it's not, don't do it. So these people that end up in their own agencies that think, well, I'm going to make a lot more money, then they find out, well, wait a minute, I'm now the last one paid instead of the first one paid. I mean, one of our ISMs is literally paying 100% of the commission that they earn to keep them on board, and so he can keep his book of business. I mean, it's not the way that you run a business. But he doesn't want to be running a business. He wants to be the cook.
Right.
So by being an ISM and being part of our network, he can do that because he doesn't have the pressures that he would have if he was totally independent. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the people that are running their own agencies, I would say, they haven't really stopped to think about, okay, why am I doing this? What is my ultimate goal? And then work backwards. If their goal was to turn it over to their kids and their kids are not interested, well, then it's changed. What are you going to change your philosophy with it? Ask the tough questions. That's the importance of the fourth precept, open and honest dialogue. So hopefully that answered your question, but I think that a lot of people don't think things through enough. How is this going to end?
Yeah, it's a Covey principle. I mean, that's and that's the thing is, Just to sidestep into that, do you think about the multiple variables that could happen? Like, are you thinking about multiple ends? And it's like, well, hey, if this happens, then, you know, is it like a choose your own adventure story to where you end up on a different page every time?
You know, I will admit that I don't think like that at all. John's over there waving.
Not at all. He just sees the end and says, "We'll get there somehow."
Yeah, that's right. That's yeah. As ridiculous as that may sound, I had an offsite meeting earlier today with some people and trying to help them think through things, and they're asking all of these questions like that. Well, it reminds me of the damage created by the internet. People are asking questions of the internet, they're getting answers, but they really didn't understand the question they should have asked, or the question they did ask, they're taking an answer that probably isn't really a full answer. So what I make it real simple is that, okay, we are a sales and service organization. You heard Rhonda say that in our meeting. Either it's sales or it's service. So what is sales? Well, sales is persuading a customer to buy from you as opposed to someone else. That's a 50-50 proposition. Do they like and trust and believe in you or not? If they do, they'll buy from you. Okay. Now the next part is, will they stay with you? Well, why would they stay with you? Well, because you're taking care of them. So how do you take care of a client? Well, on the front end, if you're selling by price, you lose by price. So at the very beginning, you're saying, let me tell you how we're different. And it's the same ethos for acquiring an agency. Agencies that are thinking or contemplating about selling, they will be wined and dined and told all these wonderful things. And we'll say, have you ever asked yourself, how is that possible? Mm-hmm. You know, like I said, the 11 agencies that we had acquired, I knew it was too good to be true. Well, if you knew it was too good to be true, now, the people that write up these contractors, I'll promise you, these people that are buying agencies that are private equity money or larger agencies, they're pretty darn smart. Yep. And they're going to have contracts with gotcha clauses in there that you really don't know what it means, and you're going to take it to your attorney who doesn't understand insurance. And they'll say, well, yeah, it looks okay to me, or here's what I think can happen. And then you blindly take that check. And we had one recently where, to Andy's point, the multiples were crazy. He got so much money up front, and now that person's not paying him. So now he has to sue him. And that's when he finds out, oh, he set this up in a separate company, a new company that bought me. And so he can bankrupt that company and I have no recourse. And, oh, I didn't think to ask this guy, did he personally guarantee this note? So that he basically lost his agency for a fraction of what he was told he would be paid.
Wow. Yeah. Some buyers are really good at contract language, and some of them are really good at contract language and math. And depends on who you're, it's got to be able to math.
Yeah, smoke and mirrors. They're also good at BS.
Exactly. So with that in mind, Mike, I mean, your personality, you do spend a lot of time thinking about the future of CoVerica, but what specifically about the industry, consumer trends, consumer habits, the feasibility of markets, weather, all this stuff that's going on right now. I mean, what should agency principals be thinking about today and about the future? It doesn't seem like it's going to stop changing.
No. And I tell young producers that I've been in the business now 44 years, and I've never had 2 years the same. Some people are frightened by that, and other people are, I think it's exciting. No. We always go to the core. Heidi and I have been very blessed. We've traveled not the whole world, but a lot. Jordan, Israel, Europe, China, I could go on. Mexico, we just got back from Mexico. And I find that people are pretty much the same all over the world. The governments are not, but the people are. I remember being in Russia and our tour guide, kind of off the cuff and said, I'll deny this if you ever repeat it. She says, how the hell you get rid of Putin?
Yeah.
So they want, what do they want? They want to be loved. They want to have friends. They want to be able to enjoy their lives and have a meaningful existence. That's the same everywhere. Okay, well, so there are clients out there that are looking for a agent that is more than just a transactional person. Because if it's all you are is transactional, you'll be AI'd out of business. So a lot of agents are running around, oh my God, AI is going to do this. Well, it is going to have a dramatic effect. However, if you can have what I dubbed as a concierge approach, is of those 300 plus million people in America, how many of them are willing to pay for quality? Now, I will tell you, Amazon isn't the cheapest on everything. I mean, they've proven it time and time again, but I like doing business with Amazon because of the convenience. Okay. Our banker, how long have we had the same banker?
For 16, longer than I've been here.
Yeah. And the reason why we found them is Safeco years ago helped us find a bank that would lend us money, because if you're an insurance agency, borrowing money is very difficult. And so we've been very loyal to them for 16 years. So if we think that their price is too high or whatever, we'll talk to them about it. But as a business owner, I want to stay focused on sales and service and not our banking relationship. If I've got somebody that we can work with, let's stay with them.
But to that point about longevity, Michael, I've been able to negotiate with them when I've felt like they were squeezing me, and they honored it or gave me some sort of additional benefit. And so
that's right.
They did exactly what we're trying to do here.
And that gets back to the customer. That's an excellent point about the customer that you're talking to, even on a personal line. Say, look, when you have the ability to prove to the carrier you've been loyal and you've been with them a long time, it's going to be in your favorite claims time. And I don't care what the Lizard or Flow or any of them say to you. If you're changing on 15 minutes, 15%, all that stuff, and you're constantly changing, when the music stops and you're trying to grab a chair and there isn't one there, what is your ability to go back and fight? You need to pay this claim. Why? Well, because it's what the contract says. Well, I don't think that's what the contract says. And then you go down that road, whereas they've been loyal clients. I mean, we've had claims ourselves where, because of the relationship that we have, where they have our insurance for like property or whatever. We had years ago, we had a golf cart that was parked, when we were in Montfort, it was underneath, and it was stolen. Well, if we hadn't been with, I think it was CNA at the time, but we'd been with them for years, they just said, oh, for God's sake. And they paid the claim. They were mad at me, but they paid the claim. There wasn't a lot of aggravation there. Whereas, can you imagine what that conversation would have been like if I had been with them 3 weeks?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
They told you to.
They're going to say, well, you got to prove that you had a golf cart.
Yeah. And finally, and we can end on this one. I mean, put yourself in an agency principal shoe that's not CoVerica. You're somewhere else. With everything going on in the world, all the change in the world, all the technology innovations, I mean, at what point do you look around and you say, gosh, maybe it is time to do something different. Maybe it is time to sell?
That's a good question, because you could make the argument with me because I'm internally perpetuating. But it's not because of I think where you were going with that. If I was an agent, let's say an average agent, where if it gets to the point that the changes are just wearing you out, that's the time to consider selling. Because there are people, that are invigorated by the constant change. I mean, literally, they like the action. Then there are people that are just worn out by it. The crucible of leadership that I have been dealing with over the last, really, when all this has been coming into fruition the last 3 or 4 years, is just the difficult nature it is to create and help motivate and train future leaders and get them to want to take on the issues, the crucible of leadership. And what I've realized is it's baby steps. If it takes 3 years for a commercial producer to figure out how to make money, you need to put people in positions of authority. And as it gets harder and harder, you look at it almost like a sports team. If you want to be first string, I watched GOAT with it was an interesting movie because they never interviewed Tom Brady. But it was a movie about him. and these people that knew him real well talked about how this guy was unrelenting on practice. And he was chosen on 6th draft, like 100 and some odd, and he was so pissed off that he was going to make the first 6 quarterbacks regret not, that they were picked before him. And he like Bledsoe, when he took over for Bledsoe, he told Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, buying me or getting my contract was the smartest business decision you ever made. Now, he was a 3rd string quarterback on the New England Patriots when he made that comment. This is somebody who the challenge motivated him.
Right.
If you're not that kind of person, you're the kind of person that ought to figure out, how do I work with somebody like CoVerica so that I can continue to do what I love to do in the business, and the parts that I don't like, there's somebody else that'll do it for me.
Oh, that's great. No, I think that's a great bit to close on. So, for our listeners out there, as many of you may know, we love to do recommendations, kind of our closing segment. This is where, things that we've consumed recently, it could be professional development resources, maybe even personal hobbies, or things that we've recently tuned into that have benefited us, that we're going to recommend them to you. And so, Leaf, why don't you get us started with your recommendation for the podcast?
It's funny, in the first episode we ever did of this, we had all just finished watching Oppenheimer. And now Oppenheimer's on Blu-ray. It's got 3 hours of special features. Highly recommend it. But it led me down a path to a book called Robert Oppenheimer, The Man and His Theories by Michael Ruse. The part of me that I like about the movie and the part I'm wanting to read more about is not the atomic bomb part. It's the black and white part of the movie. It's the political part of the movie. It's the whole Red Scare thing where everybody's a communist, and because it really gets down to what's truth. And so I've been going down a little bit of a rabbit trail with that, but would highly recommend the movie. Would highly recommend the book. The other thing is I'm my wife. I hope she doesn't hear this, but I heard Louis Armstrong on vinyl, and I'm obsessed with getting a record player now. And I heard it on a pretty decent stereo and and it was just kind of like,
it's different.
This is what it's supposed to sound like. And so I've got a lot of AV gear at home, but I'm missing a record player. But I'm looking at like old vintage, like 70s vinyl players, like old Denon and Onkyo, like Japanese.
Yeah, I got an old Yamaha.
Yeah. And I know that the vinyl rabbit trail can get quite expensive. So I'm gonna try not to go crazy with it. Maybe just pick up 10 or 15
work harder
albums,
in Ansel.
Yeah. Right. Well,
so, but the thing is I do remember, we grew up with vinyl playing 24/7, and it was all Boston and Chicago and Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin. And it was, I think I changed a cartridge head when I was like 4, and so there's also some nostalgia in there for me too, just growing up in the 80s, early 80s. So that's it for me though.
Well, I'll echo that.
Those are great recommendations, Leaf. I will say, as someone who's been collecting vinyl for about 15 years, I'd be happy to help you spend money. So, and I will also just kind of put in a mention, some early Harry Belafonte on vinyl is really nice too.
Very cool. Hey, you'll just real quick, on our daily stand up with the team, most of the team is they're fairly young, and Charlie was ill, and his voice had changed everything else. And I was like, oh, we got Barry White on the daily stand-up today. And he was like, who's Barry White? And I was like, hold on. So we actually had Barry White playing in the background of our daily stand-up yesterday.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah, can't get enough of you, babe.
So I am reminded that as you're saying that there is a whole section of the audience listening to this that has no idea what we're talking about. They never saw a record. They never saw an 8-track cassette. It's pretty amazing. And as a collector myself of the vinyl, and for a long time, it's all about the needle. So pass that along.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, what's your recommendation, John?
That was it. It's all about the needle.
It's all about the needle.
So I didn't come with any specific. Doing what I do in the risk management side, it's always constantly finding out, learning something, trying to learn something every day. And the carriers right now are running some really good series of what does the market look like? Where are things going? What are the trends and developments? And I encourage everybody to stay abreast of that through whatever means you can.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's great.
Well, to carry the vinyl thread through, don't make a rash decision and get rid of all of your vinyl, which I did years ago, because it's not come up, but it usually does in most of my conversations about the fact that, I'm a priest, I'm bivocational, and that's actually where Michael and I met, almost 18 years ago. And part of that was shedding a lot of stuff when I went off to seminary.
Right.
And part of it was all this vinyl that we had collected. But to that point, we talk a lot about the why and starting with the why. And there are, I guess, Simon Sinek is the guy who wrote about, starting with the why. And oftentimes that's, when looking at decisions for business and those kind of things. But I would, as a man of faith, and what's really made CoVerica something really special for a lot of people, and I guess Culture Index really kind of solidified that whole idea, was looking at our individually. Why do we exist? Why did God create us? And if we do that, even if we're an agency principal, it can drive a lot of the decisions that we make about what to do in the end. And it makes that end of life or continuation of life decision really easy, rather than just letting the ego be in the way. The first precept, let's just go with the facts. Here's another one that most people won't know who is Joe Friday, unless you've seen the newest version of Dragnet. So
no, watch the old one.
The old one was classic.
Listen to it on the radio; it's even better. So
okay, yeah. Now I'm out.
So I'm gonna follow Andy's lead there with my recommendation. Is I've been listening. I know I recommended Pastor Chuck Swindle of Stonebriar Community Church earlier in our podcast about the recorded episodes or recorded services of Stonebriar Church, and his recent sermons have been about when God gives you a wake up call. And he started off 2 weeks ago talking about how he a recent injury that he sustained. He fell in his bathroom. Was taken to the hospital, and they learned that he had a very, very serious heart issue, that they ended up doing kind of a bypass surgery on it, which had he not fell, he very well probably would have died, right? Sometime, months later, as he went on and talked about. But anyway, this series is really focused on, as I mentioned, when God gives you a wake up call. And he had a quote in his last sermon, and he said, I guess it was when he went to seminary, it was his teacher, Howie Hendricks, and he said, we are, I'll read it out here, we are all faced with a series of great opportunities brilliantly disguised as impossibilities. So one more time, I'll read it again. We are all faced with a series of great opportunities that are brilliantly disguised as impossibilities. And I love that sort of reframing of it. And he sort of talks about how, whether it's Saul, right, who became Paul, or Joseph, where, it would be so easy for folks sort of in our own modern day lives, right, to fall into these sort of why me, why is God punishing me? Why am I being dealt this difficult circumstance? And we're focused on the impossibility instead of seeing that this is all part of the plan. And so I can't recommend enough. He feels he's called to do this as a result of what happened to him. And so I guess next week's going to be Moses. He's going to talk about how God called upon Moses. But yeah, I highly recommend 30, 40 minutes, even if you just want to skip to the sermon. But they've been terrific.
I've already mentioned the movie GOAT, which again, it was interesting because they never interviewed Tom Brady. They just talked about him and his life and his commitment. So it was interesting. It's like the gifted hands that I mentioned last week. These inspirational people that just defy the odds that are against them. He a six-string quarterback, and arguably he won, I think, 7 Super Bowls. 7 Super Bowls. And this is somebody that was 6th round, like 100 and something into it. So that's pretty inspiring. Also, I've discovered a podcast called All In. And I think you techies would like it. I don't really understand most of the stuff they're talking about. They're young people and they're talking about technology. And the reason why I'm going to recommend is the episode 165, because here are technical people that are extremely bright, and they're talking about AI, they're talking about meta, they're talking about all these things at a very high level. And one of the guys was saying that he will not allow his kids to use anything technology at home. No phone, no computer, no nothing. And he brings up the fact that so much depression, suicide, our inability to communicate and work across the table from people is augmented by all this technology. And he was criticizing the AI. They were talking about the AR with the new the Apple Vision. And comparing it to the anyway. He was saying, when we're so hyper focused on technology to make us more efficient and make more money, the Six Sigma concept, but it's coming at a tremendous cost at our children's expense, that they don't know how to critically think, they don't know how to get along, they don't know how to be with other people, and just have discourse, critical thinking. And so he says, what are we making money at the cost of society, at the cost of community, which I circle back to, which is what is the CoVerica ethos and which makes us different. We want to make money. We want to help people make money and live out their God-given talents, but still have that, what God intended for businesses, which is for us to feed the sheep, but also have a purpose. So the end game for us, for Heidi and I, is to pass this on to the next generation. So yes, John and Andy, you are the patriarchs. You're old enough. Let's get with it.
Well, perfect. And with that recommendation, I was actually just pulling up. There was a series on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, and it was by a guy, Tristan Harris, and there's an online series called The AI Dilemma, and it's really powerful. So I would definitely recommend that. But there's some statistics. I don't quote me on this, but even just like with the social media part, it's something like suicidality in teen girls is up like 133%. Most of them, like 80% of them, are accosted by someone on social media within the first 10 days. It's just wild. But I wrote that down. I'm going to listen to that on the way home. So good recommendation.
You can explain it to me.
It's certainly changing the environment of the educational system. My wife, who's been a teacher for 36 years, now has to run written papers that have been taken home through an AI filter. And 75%. She's gone back old school. You talk about needles, old school. She's gone back to forcing them to handwrite paper.
I know. And I've told my kids, I said, these tools are available to you. They're co-pilots. They are not a replacement for your homework.
Right.
Bounce ideas off of it and get replies and challenge it. But it's not there to write your paper for you, which I think is a good way to use those tools. So that said, maybe there's an AI episode in the future. So I just wanted to say thank you for everybody that listened to today's episode of What It Takes to Lead. New episodes drop every other Thursday. Please give us a line drop us a line if you have a question or a suggestion for a future episode. You can always reach us at podcast@coverica.com or via X at WITTLPOD. Finally, if you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.